So this video is on how to make bird people. So first, I highly recommend doing bird studies and research, particularly of the exact species you're going to be using. I'm doing fan art for this because it's easy to communicate this idea to others through a character you're more familiar with. Beauregard is a monk from Critical Role, and she extremely suits the bird blue jay. So here I'm doing some research studies on blue jays before I paint the bird person version of her. If your bird person you're drawing is not any exact real species, research all the similar birds and then design the invented species. I really recommend drawing and painting the bird as a full bird before you draw it as a bird person. Think about the anatomy of the bird you're using, what sort of behavior it has in the ecosystem. Look at birds with similar niches in the ecosystem to draw from. So for example, do you want an omnivorous bird? Look at omnivorous birds. If you want a more predatory bird, look at more predatory birds. Also, the kind of wings you put on your bird person affects the way they fly, so look at the way that species of bird flies. This should affect your overall design. The more research you do, the better, but don't get too obsessed with doing research before getting on to drawing your final thing. One term for bird people is Aarakocra from Dungeons & Dragons, but I vastly prefer the term Aven, which is commonly used in Magic the Gathering, and it's a term I used actually before it was available in Magic the Gathering since I was very little. So Aven, from the Latin word for bird. Remember, as always, to look at the anatomy and structure, as well as the geometric forms and proportions. You should then focus on the tone and color. Remember, feathers are very soft, so when you're painting or drawing them, you need to depict this softness. Check out how the transitions work between the colors and tones, because sometimes there are harsh lines for spots and stripes, and sometimes it's very subtle gradient, such as in the soft feathers. Also, really look at your reference and notice just how many colors there are. This blue jay has a lot of colors, not just the obvious blue, but shades of violet and turquoise as well. If you're changing an existing character into an Aven, or even designing a new one, consider the overall color scheme and design vibe. Does it go with the vibe of the character and the colors and style of the costume? Consider the personality, behavior, and size. Using a smaller bird for a smaller person is more advisable, such as for something like a halfling. Consider the diet and ecological niche of the bird. If you want someone to be more dangerous or predatory, you should probably use a predatory bird. Or if you're changing a character that was more herbivorous or peaceful, you might want to use a bird that eats plants or at least is more omnivorous and less of a carnivore. Consider the overall symbolism of the bird you're using. Is there something about this that actually suits the character? Just make sure it feels right to you. That's the most important part. This process may help you understand your original characters and where you might need to design them more. It also helps provide insight into characters you're a fan of by making you think a bit deeper about the overall character design. If your original design isn't really that strong, this might help you improve it so that it suits the bird you're doing better. If you don't have a good overall costume, color scheme, or personality, this might actually show that as you design a bird person version of them. This also helps you understand birds better as you do research on real-life birds to help you create bird people. When gathering a reference to use, consider the angles and poses that work for the final artwork you're planning on doing. Start with the humanoid pose. Look up pose reference online, or use pose maker apps, or get people to take photographs of you in the poses you like. Consider if there's any weapons or tools you want the person to hold, and consider what kind of pose would work best to express this character. Consider a pose that would show off the wings well, because most of the time you're going to want the wings open because that's much more beautiful. There was the blue jay color palette real quick. You can always pause the video and screen capture it if you want to use this color palette for yourself. Here I'm doing the pose that'll work both for the human version and the Aven version. There's different ways you can do the legs. One version just changes the bottom of the foot, while another version, which we'll see later with the Flamingo caduceus, will shorten the upper leg and add a whole extra bend into the leg that's a bit longer. In general, Aven versions look a little bit longer in the leg than the human version. When you're gathering reference, get references of the birds. Try to get different references to get the different parts of the body to line up. You can use separate reference images as long as the part you're using as the reference lines up with your pose. For example, you want to have the head angle face correctly. You want to have the tail be correct for what you're doing. You want to have the feet that you're looking at work for your pose. And you also want to have the wing reference work for you. As I said, most of the time you'll want to draw your character with the wings open, completely, or partially open. Consider getting flying poses and having the feet pointed down or tucked up a bit if you want to draw the person flying. Consider as well how the clothing fits on the body. You can modify normal clothing to fit with wings. There'll be a section later in this video that shows some examples of how to modify the rear of clothing to fit wings. There are 3 more spots in this video that have the color palettes that you can screen grab to use for digital painting or just as a reference for traditional art if you'd like to make these characters. I have the one you just saw for Blue Jay, an upcoming one for Beauregard from Critical Role, one for Caduceus from Critical Role, and one for flamingos in general. The Flamingo Palette focuses a bit on the Caribbean flamingo, but does include a couple other species in terms of colors I selected. You can of course create your own color palettes in different digital art programs. I find it very easy in Procreate. You can bring in photos and pictures, and you can create a new color palette, select the colors from the photo, and put it into your own custom palette. When working in digital art, you can use different layers. I advise you do a line art layer above other things. You can also duplicate it and save a black line version. On a duplicate, you can use alpha lock in Procreate or clipping masks in other digital programs. You can also use clipping masks in Procreate in order to color only where you've already drawn. One of the best tips is to do a layer underneath the lines where you flat color all the areas underneath the lines, so then you can fill in different areas. With the line art on its own layer on top, you can quickly color in the lines by alpha locking, like I said, to only draw where the lines are. I also advise doing a layer on top of that for highlights and other details, as well as for glow effects like from fire, and doing a layer underneath the flat colors and setting it to multiply to do shadows. Remember to practice with different brushes in your digital art program before you do finalized pieces. Sometimes a quick fan art piece helps. Here's the color palette for Beauregard. Now here I'm doing the sketchy version of the bird person and working out all the details. I looked at reference of blue jay wings on almost the exact same angle so that I could get the wings quite accurate. As you also saw earlier, I did several versions of the tail until I was happy with it and felt it was accurate enough. I actually prefer this line art version with the more sketchy lines, but for some reason when I was working on it, I kind of got in the mood to make the lines thin and really perfect. So I did a line art layer on top in pure black line art, and I changed the staff and the cord for the staff slightly from the original version because it didn't fit well with the tail. But in the end, if I just changed the staff a little bit, I think I would have liked the sketchy lines better, which is what I'm doing the rest of the Birdy Nein in. But here, I worked out all the details and line art. Before I moved on, I also saved a blank background version of the line art, and here you see I duplicated that layer, alpha locked it, and I'm doing a color line art version. You can also work by filling in the flats underneath at this stage. I find this technique works well. Here's where I filled in the flats and started filling in a lot of solid colors. I'm using a downloaded Adobe brush that I got for free from the Procreate brush forums, and I like this brush a lot. It's become one of my very favorite brushes. For soft textures and techniques, I often use another free downloaded brush I found on the same Procreate forums, which is called Oil Painty Wet. It has a sort of fur-like soft texture and is a very blendy brush that blends everything around it. I use that brush a lot for all the soft areas of the feathers, and for any harder lines that I still want it to be somewhat soft, I use that Adobe brush. Find what brushes you like in your digital art program. Don't be settled and happy for the default brushes. Go and download more. Try to make your own. Look up how to make your own brushes. Don't just settle. But if you do find brushes and tools and techniques you like, feel free to use them rather than having to change up your techniques and brushes all the time. But I do advise downloading more brushes and finding the ones you like, even though the default brushes in Procreate are very good. This advice pretty much applies to all digital art programs, not just Procreate specifically. When I was thinking about this character and what she would look like as a bird person, I had to find the perfect bird. Immediately, Blue Jay was what my boyfriend suggested, and it was the perfect suggestion. It suits the character Beauregard on every level. Blue jays are aggressive, loud, mean, and they never give in to pressure. They're always fighting, even when they don't need to, and they are often more aggressive than necessary. But they're also scrappy survivors that are adaptable. They eat various foods and are omnivorous, preferring seeds. They take what they need and want, and they travel in groups. So it's perfect for a monk adventurer with a scrappy, powerful attitude. Just on every level. Blue jay is definitely perfect for Beauregard. Also, the blue color scheme. It matches. This Caribbean flamingo is a photo reference from Pixabay. I used a different photo reference to redraw it in this position. It was a different species of flamingo, so I had to translate it using different Caribbean flamingo reference. Caribbean flamingos are much brighter pink, red, and orange, and when you see the color palette I'll be putting up in the video later, you'll realize it's actually a lot of pale pinks with very vibrant orange, orange reds, and reds, which is very interesting. The black areas are actually super dark red and pink. As you know, the pigmentation of flamingos actually comes from the bright colors in the shrimps they eat, and the health of a flamingo is very much reflected in the colors. An unhealthy flamingo will be much unhealthier looking, paler, more gray toned, and not so vibrant. The reason why I'm doing this flamingo study is because I decided the perfect bird for the next member of the Birdy Mighty Nein for Critical Role fan art is Caduceus Clay. He suits flamingo for several reasons. I'm going to explain the reasons why I picked flamingo for Caduceus. One of the first reasons is he's a very thin, very tall character. He is a fearbulb with pink mohawk and is a grave domain cleric with a vegetarian specialized diet. Flamingos have very odd diets as well, eating planktonic algae and microscopic shrimp. He was first encountered in a graveyard, and flamingo also live in inhospitable alkaline lakes, which most other animals would avoid. So the habitat and diet thematically fit his vibe as well, not just the pink coloration and tall, slender frame. When I worked on the Avon version, I shortened the neck from what a flamingo would have. I also added a feather mohawk and changed up a few things. You can also make the face more expressive. As you see, I shortened the upper thigh and calf muscles and added an extra bend to the leg and a long section. This suits flamingos better and adapts from the standard humanoid base. I worked in layers and worked out his armor. I did a different shield here than the old fan art you see at the side because at this point he has a different shield. Now, the shield I made smaller because a bird person probably can't use a very large shield, just so that they can still be able to fly. From the underneath, flamingo wings show the bone structure and have quite thin feathers, so it's important to look at reference rather than guessing at what you think something should look like. Compared to a full flamingo, the neck is shorter, as I said, because this is a flamingo person. Feel free to add feathery crests onto things for the sort of hair section, especially if the character you're translating into a bird person has an iconic hairstyle. The other thing I did with these bird people is make sure there's color in the eye and use the original eye color of the characters rather than the eye color of the birds the Avon is based on. Caduceus has a white silk shirt with chitinous green metallic beetle armor with pink and reddish lichen growing on it, as well as boots. For bird people, I tend to remove the bottom of the boots so the clawed feet are visible. I often think this looks and functions much better. Sometimes I end the boots a little higher up, but usually the toes at least poke out. For this, it's also important to remember to adapt things. This is supposed to be Caduceus from a bit further than his first encounter, so I actually made the silk look more gray, as if it had been stained a bit with time, and as I said, I changed the shield out to the Shield of Retribution, which was a shield that Caduceus picked up. I was considering even putting bloodstains on, but decided, well, maybe he washed them out. I also put a butterfly in his hand to represent part of his personality, and I thought it would be interesting. Here's where I added the flamingo in. And I was making sure everything looked nice and metallic. Now here's my old art tip page, which is available now on my DeviantArt, which is under the name Aronith. These are clothing tips for how to add wings. When you look at the back view of this humanoid body, you have to make sure the clothing attaches and fits around where the wings would come in. The width of the base of the wing, whether it's bat or bird-like or insectile, is important for these designs, so as long as there's enough room, you have to make sure the clothing can attach, take on, and be put off. I also had some example weapons that were useful for people who fly. Feel free to go get that art tip page and use it to help you with your flying humanoids. Well, I think I did a pretty good job on this video, so I can be proud of it. I'm sorry it's a bit late, but various things cause delays. It seems like my new videos keep going up more often on Sundays, sadly. I hope everyone's looking forward to more videos. I'll be making one again soon. Have a great day. Bye!